Hi, BookTube. Bill Ruttenberg here with the Ruttenberg Library. Come to you this afternoon with the book tag. Steve Donahue did the mid-year book Freakout tag of 2020 and tagged me in that, and so wanted to respond to that tag. There are a couple people who have tagged me in other videos. Then I promise you I will get to those. This one just seems to be a little easier to do since um, these are just the books in the last 6 months that I've read, so it was easier to pick through. But so I'll leave the link to Steve's video down in the description. So here we go. The mid-year book Freakout tag 2020. So number one, the best book you've read so far in 2020. So for me, I think the best book that I have read was To America, Personal Reflections of a Historian by Stephen Ambrose. That's one of the, I actually picked two for this, but that's one of the two books that I felt was just absolutely great. Ambrose goes through and tells his stories behind the story and tells about how he came up with the idea for books, what was going on in his life at the time that really had an impact on his writing, and I found it very fascinating. And the other book that I would pick as the best book I've read is The Impending Crisis, 1848 to 1861 by David Potter. This book won the Pulitzer Prize. It is all about the antebellum period, that time leading up to the Civil War. It's an older book, but it's still a great book. It was great. It covered all of the major events in the 12 years before the Civil War. It told you quite a bit about the individual people who were having huge impacts on, just the United States in the North and the South. And he doesn't try to side with one side versus the other. He's pretty even keel on, covering the different personalities. And I thought that was just great. It was a great study of the time period. So question number two, the best sequel you've read so far in 2020. Well, this was kind of an easy one because I've only read one sequel so far. And that was Camino Winds by John Grisham. It was his newest book that came out, and it was a sequel to Camino Islands. And this was about a bookseller down off the coast of Florida. He's got a bookshop. A hurricane comes in, wipes out a whole bunch of stuff on the island, and at the same time, a murder's committed. And so the whole book is basically a murder mystery. Who did it? And the bookseller, Bruce Cable, is with a bunch of his writer friends, and they're trying to put the mystery together and trying to solve it, trying to help the police. So that's the only sequel I've read, so that would be the best one. Number three, new release you haven't read yet but want to. American Rebels, how the Hancock, Adams, and Quincy families fanned the flames of revolution. I always think that that period right before the American Revolution is pretty fascinating. A lot of cool stuff happened. And, of course, those are some big-name families and helping to get that done. And that book was written by Nina Sankovich. And I saw this on somebody's channel. I think maybe Peg had it. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I saw that, and I was like, man, I want to read that. And it looked really good. And it came out, I think it was in March it came out. And so I'll have to be on the lookout for that. Number four, most anticipated release for the second half of the year. And I got two of these. John Grisham's coming out with a book on my birthday, October 13th, coming out with a book called A Time for Mercy, and it is a sequel to A Time to Kill, which was his very first novel. He takes the readers back to Clanton, Mississippi. Jake Bridgens is the lawyer involved. It's another lawyer book, and it just sounds like it's going to be awesome. It's a bigger book, and I've been waiting for a sequel to that one, and here it is. I'm just real excited about that. He always writes, real fast page turners. And the second book is The Zealot and the Emancipator, John Brown and Abraham Lincoln in the Struggle for American Freedom. And this is a book that's supposed to come out, I think it was October 6th is the date that I saw. And it's H.W. Brands, who is one of my favorite nonfiction writers. He is absolutely great storyteller. He usually writes really big books. I didn't check to see how big this one was, but um, I look forward to it. It's got Abraham Lincoln in it, so how can you go wrong with that? Number 5, my biggest disappointment. The biggest disappointment that I've read this year, hands down for me. Well, now that I'm thinking of it, maybe it's not a disappointment because I wasn't. I didn't know what to think of it in the first place, but it was called "You Never Forget Your First: A Biography of George Washington" by Alexis Coe. If you watched my review on that, I despised that book. It was nothing special. It was a really basic history of George Washington. It didn't go into any depth. She made fun of a lot of the current authors of George Washington biographies who are very, very good writers, and she made fun of a lot of them. Made almost kind of some off-color jokes about stuff, and I just didn't think it was very appropriate for a professional book. And yeah, that was a disappointment. But again, my bar wasn't set very high once I read the title of the book. If I had a number 2 on that, it might be the Sidney Blumenthal. I read the first volume of his Lincoln biographies, and it's not that it was bad. I just don't know that it was what I was hoping, and so that was a little bit of a disappointment. And I'm hoping the next couple volumes in that series gets a little bit better. All right, next question. Number 6, the biggest surprise. My biggest surprise, very, very pleasant surprise, was Prisoners of Geography, 10 Maps That Explain Everything About the World by Tim Marshall. That was awesome. That book showed how geography really affects world events, world history, current events, and current history. And he tied old history to new history and showed how a big set of mountains can cause problems for a nation. It showed how having water access can cause some friction between countries. He just showed a lot of basic geography stuff that I teach my 6th and 7th graders, and he did a really good job putting it into a book, and I really enjoyed that. And then the other biggest surprise for me, because I don't read science fiction, hardly ever, and I read The Time Machine because I'm trying to branch out a little bit in my reading, and so I read The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, and it's a very short book, but it left me wanting more. It left me wanting to hear more of the story, and I think that's good if the author leaves you wanting to read more of his works. And it had a whole bunch of, kind of big ideas in there. It hit on a lot of stuff that I was not expecting, and so that was my biggest surprise. My new favorite author, and this can be a debut author or just new to me. And I picked Wild Bill, the true story of the American frontier's first gunfighter by Tom Clavin, sorry, I might have mispronounced that. But anyway, he's a good author. I had never read him before. I'd heard of him, but I'd never read him before. And he writes a lot of Western histories, and he also had one, I believe, on Valley Forge that I really want to read, especially now that I've read this. But this book, it was just fascinating. Bill Hickok and his time in the West and the history of the West as he was telling this story. It was really good, fast-paced, very entertaining. So Tom Clavin, sorry, should have probably looked that up. But anyway, number 8, newest fictional crush. Sigh. Yeah, I'm a married man. I'm not answering that. I'm smarter than that. That would leave incriminating evidence. No, I'm just kidding. I don't read books that have that kind of stuff in it anyway. I don't get crushes on my characters. Yeah, I'm just leaving. I'm punting that one. Number 9, newest favorite character. And right now I'm currently reading The Bully Pulpit, and I've liked reading about Theodore Roosevelt ever since I started reading about him. It became one of my favorites, and so this is, I guess, not new, but it's rekindling that, and it's making me want to read more about Theodore Roosevelt. I think he's a fascinating character. I know not everybody likes him or some other people can find things to pick at, but I just think he is an incredible character in American history. Big ego. It's just fascinating what he was able to get done. And it's making me want to read the Edmund Morris biography that I've got back there that's on my TBR. A book that made you cry. I chose The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. She tells the story of her childhood and her mom and dad, and there's just issues in the family and poverty, and it was a little bit dysfunctional. We'll just keep it at that. And it really rang home, or rang true for me, was stuff that I had when I was a kid, and so that book made me cry. Book that made you happy. The book that made me happy, yeah, there's 3 of them right there. Haven't read them yet, so I'm cheating a little bit on this one. But the Shelby Foote trilogy, I am so happy that I got that. Like I said, I haven't read it yet. I plan on getting to it, but I had the 2nd volume in the series for quite a while now, and I could never find the Shelby Foote series. And then I found them for cheap at the bookstore, and so I was pretty pumped about that. That's probably the one that made me the happiest. So now I can get started on that. Number 12, most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received. Now, I've told you before on this channel that I really appreciate the artwork on almost every cover. They're all, different. I can find stuff that I like about almost every book cover. But I really like old paintings. And so I chose George Washington, the Frontier Colonel. And this is a reprint of Sterling North's book. This is one of those old when did he do this one? The 1950s, North Star books. They did those biographies that everybody's seen in the libraries in the 1950s, 40s, and 50s. And anyway, he wrote this biography, and this is a new print of that. And it's got, if you look through there, it's got all kinds of paintings and stuff, and it's just updated what was a good book. I like that. I like old paintings. Number 13, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And so now I told you that Theodore Roosevelt, that's being rekindled for me. So the volume 1, The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt by Edmund Morris, which is on my TBR. Another one on my TBR is volume 3 of the Richard Nixon trilogy by Stephen Ambrose. I want to finish off that trilogy. I've enjoyed the first 2. The Caning, which is about when Charles Sumner got caned in the 1850s. He got caned in the middle of Congress for some comments that he made, and this was a book that was recommended to me by Peg over the History Shelf. I got Reelecting Lincoln, The Battle for the 1864 Presidency by John C. Waugh. That's one of my ones that's up next. It's in the stack over there on my desk. And then there's a biography by Stonewall Jackson, and I, for the life of me, can't remember the name of the author, and it's up in the upper room upstairs. I didn't want to go upstairs because my daughter's napping, so but there's a biography on Stonewall that I want to get read. So those are some of the books that are on my TBR for the rest of the year. Pretty excited about those. So this is my take on the mid-year book Freakout Tag 2020. Thank you, Steve, for tagging me in this. Enjoyed doing this. I always enjoy going back and looking at what I've been able to accomplish in my reading so far for the year. I hope to accomplish more towards the end. So until next time, BookTube, have a nice day.